You check your phone before you leave the house. You want to know if it will rain. You want to know if a storm is coming. But somewhere below your feet, animals already know something you don't. And the real answer is far stranger than a weather app. For centuries, people in earthquake zones told the same story. The dogs stop barking. The birds go silent. The snakes leave their burrows in the dead of winter and freeze to death in the open, as if the ground itself had become more dangerous than the cold. Farmers noticed it. Fishermen noticed it. Nobody could explain it. So for a long time, nobody believed it either. Then, in February 1975, something happened in northeastern China that changed the conversation. In the city of Haicheng, officials began receiving strange reports. Snakes were emerging from hibernation weeks early. Rats were seen fleeing buildings in broad daylight. Livestock refused to enter their pens. Local authorities, taking the pattern seriously, ordered an evacuation. Hours later, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake tore through the region. Because people had already left their homes, the death toll was a fraction of what it could have been. It remains one of the only large earthquakes in modern history where an evacuation based partly on animal behavior may have saved thousands of lives. Was it luck? Maybe. Scientists have argued about Haicheng for 50 years, but the story refused to die because it kept happening again. Fast forward to December 26, 2004. A massive undersea earthquake off the coast of Sumatra triggers one of the deadliest tsunamis in recorded history. Waves surge across the Indian Ocean, killing over 200,000 people across more than a dozen countries. In Sri Lanka, the wall of water tears through beaches, villages, and one particular stretch of coastline inside Yala National Park, a wildlife reserve packed with elephants, leopards, and hundreds of other species. Here's the part that stunned rescue workers. Human bodies were found scattered along that coast. Animal bodies were not. Elephants that had been grazing near the shoreline that morning were later found alive, far inland, on higher ground. Wildlife officials combing the park in the tsunami's aftermath reported almost no animal casualties at all. In an area where the human toll was severe, something had moved those animals to safety, hours before a wave that no person saw coming. You might be thinking, coincidence? Big animals? Big park? Maybe they just got lucky. Fair. But this is where the story stops being folklore and starts becoming a research question. A geophysicist named Helmut Tributsch spent years chasing this exact mystery. In his research, later published under the title When the Snakes Awake, he proposed that many animals may be far more sensitive than we are to subtle environmental changes that precede seismic activity. Not magic, physics. Tributsch pointed to changes in the electrical charge of the air, shifts in groundwater chemistry, and the release of gases from stressed rock deep underground, all potential signals that could occur in the hours or days before a major earthquake. A dog's nose, a snake's tongue, a bird's inner ear. These are instruments finely tuned by millions of years of survival pressure. Yours is tuned to notice a missed text message. Here's a question worth sitting with. What if the ability to sense danger never disappeared from your species? What if it just got buried under everything else? In 2010, a researcher named Rachel Grant gave this question some of its strongest scientific backing yet. She had been tracking a population of common toads at a breeding site in central Italy as part of an unrelated ecological study. Then, 5 days before a devastating magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck the city of L'Aquila in 2009, something odd happened. The number of male toads at the breeding site dropped by nearly all of them. Toads that had been reliably present night after night simply vanished. They did not return until after the aftershocks had passed. Grant published her findings in the Journal of Zoology, and it became one of the first peer-reviewed studies to document a measurable, quantifiable animal behavior change tied directly to a specific earthquake, not just an anecdote passed down after the fact. Toads. Of all animals, toads. Not eagles, not wolves. A small, slow, unglamorous creature that lives half its life buried in mud turned out to be one of the more convincing pieces of evidence that something real is happening beneath the surface of these stories. So what is it, exactly, that they're picking up on? Nobody has a single, complete answer. But researchers keep circling the same handful of theories. Some point to P waves, the faster, weaker seismic waves that travel ahead of the more destructive S waves during an earthquake, arriving seconds or even longer before humans can feel anything at all. Others point to changes in the ionosphere, the layer of Earth's atmosphere that some studies suggest may shift subtly before major seismic events, altering the electromagnetic environment animals live inside every day. Others focus on gas. Rock under extreme pressure can release radon and other gases into groundwater and soil. And for a creature that breathes through its skin, like a toad, or smells the world in extraordinary detail like a dog, that kind of change might be impossible to ignore. None of this means animals can predict earthquakes the way a calendar predicts a birthday. What it suggests is something quieter and, in some ways, more unsettling. It suggests the Earth is always talking. It's just talking in frequencies most of us stopped listening to a long time ago. It isn't only earthquakes, either. Long before Hurricane Katrina reached the Gulf Coast in 2005, wildlife officials in Louisiana reported unusual movement among alligators and wading birds, animals shifting inland ahead of a storm system that most residents were still watching unfold on television. Long before wildfires reach a ridgeline, rangers in California and Australia have described watching deer, kangaroos, and birds move away from a slope days before flames arrive, sometimes before any human spotter has confirmed a fire in that direction at all. You could call each of these a coincidence in isolation. It gets harder to call all of them coincidences once you notice how often the pattern repeats across different animals, different continents, and different kinds of disasters entirely. Here's another question. Why don't we take this more seriously as a warning system? Part of the answer is scientific caution, and that caution is fair. Anecdotes are not data. 100 stories about nervous dogs before an earthquake are not the same thing as 100 controlled, repeatable observations. Researchers like Tributsch and Grant have spent careers trying to turn folklore into something falsifiable, something you could actually build a warning system around. And the honest, current answer is that we are still not there. No government agency issues an evacuation order because toads left a pond. The signal is real often enough to study. It is not yet reliable enough to trust with human lives on its own. But there's a second, quieter reason we don't take it seriously. And it has less to do with science and more to do with how you live. Most people alive today have never needed to notice a change in the wind, or the smell of the soil, or the tension in a group of birds overhead. Climate control replaced the need to sense a coming storm. Streetlights replaced the need to track the moon. Supermarkets replaced the need to notice when the land itself was changing. None of that makes you worse than your ancestors. It makes you differently equipped. You solve problems they never had to solve. But it also means the muscle they relied on, the one that reads the environment automatically and instantly, has had almost nothing to exercise for generations. Researchers who study animal behavior around natural disasters describe this sensitivity using a term worth understanding plainly. They call certain species bioindicators, living organisms whose behavior reflects changes in their environment that instruments haven't detected yet, or can't detect at all. A bioindicator doesn't need to understand what's coming. It only needs to react to what it feels right now, immediately, without deliberation. That reaction is faster than reasoning. It has to be. In the wild, an animal that stops to think about why it feels uneasy is often an animal that doesn't survive long enough to find out if it was right. You still have a version of that system running quietly in the background of your own body. It's the same system that makes you glance over your shoulder on an empty street before you consciously register a sound. It's the same system that makes a parent wake up seconds before a child cries without any noise to explain it. Neuroscientists studying the autonomic nervous system point out that humans process a vast amount of environmental information below the level of conscious awareness, and that this information can influence mood, alertness, and behavior long before you could ever explain it in words. You call it a gut feeling because that's the only language you have left for something your ancestors would have simply called paying attention. Think about what that means for you. Specifically, you live inside a body built by the same evolutionary pressure. Your ancestors needed to sense danger before they could reason about it. A rustle in the grass, a drop in temperature, a silence that wasn't supposed to be there. For most of human history, survival depended on picking up signals long before language could explain them. Somewhere in that deep old wiring, you still have some of that. It shows up as a gut feeling you can't quite justify. It shows up as the hair on your arm standing up in a room that feels wrong before you know why. Scientists studying stress physiology suggest the human nervous system retains many of the same rapid response pathways found in animals that react to environmental threat, even if modern life gives those pathways almost nothing left to do. Maybe that's the real reframe here. This was never just a story about earthquakes. It was a story about attention. About what happens when a species builds so many layers of noise, comfort, and distraction between itself and the natural world that it forgets how to notice the signals that kept it alive for 200,000 years. You will probably never evacuate your house because a toad disappeared from your backyard. That's not the point. The point is that somewhere in Sri Lanka, in the middle of the deadliest tsunami of the century, an elephant felt something in the ground you would have walked right past. Somewhere in China, in 1975, a snake decided that freezing to death in the open was safer than staying underground. And it was right. Somewhere in Italy, a population of toads packed up and left days before the earth split open, and a scientist happened to be watching closely enough to notice. The instincts didn't disappear. They just found somewhere quieter to live. So the next time you check your phone before you leave the house, remember this: the animals around you were never checking an app. They were listening to the planet directly. And maybe, underneath everything modern life has built on top of you, some small, old part of you is still listening too.